My name is Deirdre Robb, Director of Belfast Exposed, and we have the pleasure of Tristan Poyser here today, who's going to give us a talk on his work. Just for noting, Conor O'Brien, he's our host, and he's muted you all at the moment. The main reason for that is just to try and keep some sense of order. We have a chat function that if you have any questions along the way, please put it into the chat, and the talk is going to come in two parts. So and it's talking about the two different projects that Tristan's been working on. And part one, if you have any questions or any queries, I can stop and look at what those are and sort of relate them to Tristan in the midway point. But with no further ado, Tristan, do you want to make yourself known here?
Hi everybody, thank you very much for coming along, and thanks for having me, Deirdre and Conor.
Yeah, and just for people's information, Tristan, this is the second time Tristan has worked with us. Tristan came to Belfast Exposed, it must have been in mid-2019, and he was actually developing his first project, an Englishman's response to the Invisible in Between project, and it was coming up to the 31st of, it was coming up to the exit of the EU exit potential, which was meant to happen on the 31st of March 2019, which, as we now know, did not happen. But also Tristan has revisited the project and also continued it on in different ways, which has been a really positive impact, and some of the participatory aspects of it have been really, really interesting and engaging, and give us a broader insight into what people's thoughts and feelings were. So it's not just his photographic work, it's actually what he does with them and how he handles it is of great interest. And again, as we've entered into Brexit, we are in a position of change and transition, especially here in Northern Ireland, probably impacted more than the rest of the UK at this stage. A lot of unknowns, a lot of uncertainty. So I think it's timely that we have brought Tristan back into our Street View programme, which, if for those who don't really know, it's a digital on the street kind of display of Tristan's work at the minute, but it's also a bit of audio descriptive there as well, talking about Tristan himself, as well as the background to his projects. And without further ado, Tristan, I'm going to let you carry on the conversation about your work.
Thank you very much, Deirdre. Bear with me while I attempt to share my screen. Conor, if you can just let me know once it's sharing successfully. If it does, that'd be fantastic. So yeah, can you see that? Wonderful. So I've just started a video slideshow of the projects. Whilst that's running, I'm just going to talk through the projects. And again, if you've got any questions, pop it in the chat, and Deirdre will either introduce them whilst I'm talking or at the end of each section. And again, hopefully Deirdre will ask me some questions as we go, and I can pause the video. So the Invisible in Between, an Englishman's Search for the Irish Border, came about as a result of the Brexit referendum. For me, I really struggled with the fact that we could vote in England and impact a border which we didn't live on, which we may know nothing about. I certainly didn't know much about it at all. I didn't know much about the island of Ireland. And so after speaking to some people, I decided that I wanted to respond to that result, I think, which shocked lots of people. I decided to do a workshop with 14 and 15-year-olds in high school to see what they knew about the history of the border, to find out what they knew about the present Brexit issues that we had with the referendum and how that could impact their future. And I was really shocked to find out how little they knew and how little they were aware of it. I also spoke to family members, and my mum, who's got a house in France, she's got a niece who lives in Germany. I found out that she'd voted for Brexit, and not that she likes me telling anyone, but she'd done so not because of her issues with Europe, because she's a Europhile. She's got a house in France. It was to do with our own native issues within England, not even the UK. And so for me, what I wanted to do was go and find out more about the border for myself, to find out about the communities that lived there and how it would impact them. Also, my background's in ecology and environmental biology, and I love the outdoors. My dad always used to take me up in Derbyshire. And so for me, it was an excuse to wander around a beautiful countryside, make photographs, and also find out about a new place. And that was back in 2016 that the referendum happened. I spent time researching it and then went over in 2016 to start making work. In total, I spent about 7 weeks driving up and down the border, trying to walk along it wherever I could, and always seeing where the border is, which is really tricky. You want to actually look at the border as a physical line on a map. It's difficult to follow with all the contortions and twists and turns it does, and it's even more difficult in person. And Google tells lies as well. It will tell you this mountain's another one, to try and, I suppose.
Sorry, Tristan, I don't want to interrupt you, but could you move your mouse away from?
Sorry.
There, that's better. Sorry, it's just so people can see it properly. Thank you.
Thank you, Deirdre. To try and inform my my lack of understanding, I got in touch with 3 people that lived or grew up on or near the border. 2 of them were academics, writers. One was Conor Callaghan, who grew up from the border near Newry in Dundalk. Another was Garrett Carr, who'd written a book called Walking the Land, all about the border. And then there was a photographer, videographer called Jackie Denevy-Reid up from Derry, Londonderry. And so when I was walking with them, it was Conor that pointed out that that mountain was wrong on Google, and also telling me anecdotes about the area, how it was growing up on the border and the duality that he felt, not necessarily feeling that he was, I suppose, part of the UK, or that he didn't have the same connection with people from Belfast or Dublin. And this is something that's totally new to me. Once I'd started making work, my issue was how to show the border. It's an invisible line the majority of the time, unless you take pictures of the tarmac or the signage. And so I started to investigate ways to demonstrate that. I thought about drawing on it with pen, and I ripped one, and I always speak to my wife, and she told me off. She said, "You can't rip that picture. That's not what you do." And I do. I respect photographs. It's like breaking a spine on the book. It's something that you wouldn't do. And so as soon as she said that, I knew it was something that I did need to do, because it would challenge my own perception of photography in relationship with it. And also it was that damaging act. It was an irreversible act, like casting a vote. It's something that you can do very quickly, but you can't undo. You can try and stick it together, you can tape it, but it will never go back to the way that it was. Then the project evolved further, and I started asking other people to tear photographs to show how difficult it was to show the border, with the idea of exhibiting them side by side. So you'd have my geographically correct tear showing the border, but also you'd have other people's guesses, which would show arbitrary tears. I did a professional development workshop with Grain Projects and Format in Derby, and they bring in other photographers as mentors to help your professional practice. And one of them, Natasha Caruana, she gave me a good bollocking for not documenting what people were saying and all these stories that I was able to tell, but I had no evidence of them. And because I struggle with my organizational skills, I've got ADHD, I decided the best thing to do was to get books and ask people to tear a photograph, stick it into the book there and then, and write a comment about how they felt about the uncertainty they were feeling. Because the time from 2016 all the way through till, well, still things are uncertain. So that happened halfway through the project, and I carried the book with me everywhere I went. Whether if you sat next to me on a train or a plane, I'd harass you. If you're a political canvasser at my front door, I'd get you to sign it. And so that's continued, and every time I've exhibited it, well, in fact, that was the way that I managed to meet Deirdre and Conor. I doorstepped them at the gallery. I was in Belfast on one of my trips, and I went and knocked on the office door, explained who I was, and asked them to participate and tear a photograph. Unfortunately for me, Deirdre invited me in and wanted to know more about it, and offered me to join the Futures the Belfast Futures programme, which meant that I then had an exhibition for the first Brexit date on, again, the 31st of March, I think it was, which didn't happen. From then on, I was lucky enough to have an exhibition or something happening at every potential Brexit date. So the next one was the Look Festival in Liverpool. And then the one after that, it was supposed to be October 2019. And I ended up turning the van that I lived in whilst I was on the border into a projection van. So I was able to take it to the opening of Look Festival in Liverpool, back project the participation pages at the opening without an invitation. I did have some work in the show somewhere, but it allowed me to take my van wherever I wanted. I did the same in Brixton as part of another exhibition. I parked up in a public street and stopped members of the public on Halloween and trick or treaters to participate. I also had some Jameson's whiskey and oh, what's the other whiskey from? I made sure I had a whiskey from each side of the border because I didn't want to. I didn't want to stay objective. And each time I did this, and starting at Belfast Exposed, I had participation books within the exhibition space, so people were able to respond to the work there and continue the project. So I meant, although I stopped the hard work, you know, quite a while ago, making the pictures, I've lent on members of the public to contribute to try and create a narrative that's different from politicians, it's different from social media, it's different from mainstream media. It's so I can understand what real people think, whether they be Irish, Northern Irish, German, Japanese tourists, or even my own family. And so to date, I've got 500, well, 500 plus, I think it's about 550 or 60 participants. And even today, I was lucky enough to get one back in the post. I don't know if you can see me as well as the slide, but as part of us coming into the next project, whilst I was over in Ireland, I went to the Remote Photography Festival, I think it was in 2018, where I always tried to time my visits so that I could go to any photography festivals in Belfast and in Dublin, because it makes sense. So I went to the Remote Photography Festival and met people from Fort Dunree and ArtLink, and I was fortunate that they were interested in the project and offered for me to exhibit it there. Unfortunately, because of everything that's happened, the exhibition didn't happen until December last year that's just gone. And by that point, we were deep into the pandemic and lockdown. And it was Martha from ArtLink who suggested, she was aware of the project I'm going to talk about next. And she suggested that I exhibit both of them because of the impact that the pandemic has had on the Irish border. So for that exhibition, because I wasn't able to leave a participation book there because of COVID restrictions and people handling the book, it was decided that I'd do a postal participation project. So instead of having the book, we had an Eventbrite page where people could join up to the talk, and once they were asked for a donation. I was also lucky to get some funding from Grain, who had been mentoring me early on in the project, to fund the cost of the postal participation. And so 45 people signed up. They were all sent the elements to create this, to participate, picture to tear. I took one of the books to pieces, so it would be on the same paper, and gave them instructions so that they could participate during the talk and then post them back in a stamped self-addressed envelope. And so I keep getting trickles of these through the post, and as I get them, I scan them and update them. And so that's why I know I've got over 500, but I keep getting a few more every day that I'm updating. And to be able to do that participatory element through the post in this time, for me, is quite important as well. Especially when I'm teaching students at the moment and talking about the potential for their end of year shows, and which is really difficult for them because we're locked down. They can't do what they'd normally do. They're not in Carlisle near the university, so they've got to come up with ideas and concepts to create work that can be physical without being physically present. Yeah, so I think I think that's probably where I am with the invisible in between. I'm sure I could say lots more, but it's probably a good time to open to questions so I can fit in the next project.
Yeah, you can pause that there if you want. A couple of things that sort of came to my mind from before the project, maybe during it, and when you did come to, and you did doorstep us, and you weren't going away until we engaged with you, but whenever that did happen, personally, the thought of actually ripping a photograph was really foreign to me. And I thought about it afterwards, and it nearly becomes such a violent act. And I suppose within the context of when would you ever rip up a photograph, and it tends to be when you were angry with somebody, or you're splitting up, or you're a divorce. And I suppose the history within the legacy of Northern Ireland is there has been a lot of violence, and so for me, actually ripping the photograph, I felt it was quite a violent act. And so that engagement with photography was very different than what my normal engagement with photography was. So I actually thought that was worth noting. I think also the participatory element of it was much stronger than even what I anticipated at the start. We literally, the books that we left in Belfast exposed at the time to engage with it. Normally it can be quite hard to get people to engage in a participatory program, but basically the book was left there, the instructions were there, and we were tsunamied nearly at times with people wanting to engage with it. And the amount of people that maybe came to the gallery were very different. They were not just interested in photography, but they were interested in the Brexit debate, who maybe didn't think that they had a voice initially, because Northern Ireland, as most people know, did not vote for Brexit. There was 60% of us said no, and that was a fair percentage. Nonetheless, democratically, we have to adhere to the democratic rules of the UK altogether. So I thought there was a couple of things that was worth putting out. There's a few comments here. We see, yes, and Michelle Maloney. Michelle, do you want to ask it? Because you said you would like to ask a question about participation.
I'll unmute you now, Michelle. That should be you now.
Hi, thank you. Great work, really, really interesting work. I wanted to ask you, because I suppose I'm, in a way, it sort of follows on from what Deirdre was saying, and the idea in Northern Ireland, this idea of whatever you say nothing, that I'm really sort of surprised that you had such participation. Were people quite open about their engaging with it, or did you have a lot of people who choose not to engage with it? Because I think as well, and kind of another part of the question about that, I love the idea that you have an artifact. I think that's really, particularly in this digital age, I'm just think that that's just so important. And also that people committed to paper their thoughts. This seems extraordinary, because I was doing something recently and I'd asked people to write something, and people who I thought would engage much more didn't actually. It was just the idea of actually committing to writing something. So if you could just say something about that. And the work is wonderful, I think.
Thank you very much, Michelle. For me, with the participation and walking, I suppose, on the border, where the majority of the time I was trespassing because the border goes across private land, I suppose I took to wearing a high-vis jacket so everyone could see me and know that I wasn't hiding after a couple of incidents. And so when people did see me, it was obviously I was up to something a bit different, because I was shooting on a 5.4 a lot of the time. So I'd have a big tripod, big camera. And so most people were really interested in what I was doing. They always seemed slightly disappointed to hear an English accent. And so they wouldn't be able to ask me my name and who I was related to and did I know so-and-so, which for me was a really interesting experience, which happened when I was with Connor. So once, I suppose, because people are so friendly along the border, anyone that's visited it will know that as soon as you, from a distance, they'll only put one finger up on the steering wheel because they don't know who you are. But as soon as you stop and actually engage with them, everyone's really friendly. So it was only a couple of people refused to. or there were some old farmers which didn't feel comfortable writing, and I would offer to write for them if that was the case. Again, it didn't happen very often. So maybe in total over the whole time, 5 people might have refused to participate. Those that tried to refuse, I try and be persuasive. And what I ask for is only for people to put their first name and where they're from. So there's no personal intention. There was somebody who wrote something about the IRA, where he was from in Belfast and his full name, which I found very worrying, because should I be publishing this? If something happened, would I be responsible for it? But generally people were interested and eager. Away from the border, the people were more eager, and it seemed those that were, I suppose, more politically aligned one way or the other were interested in writing their thoughts and having their voices heard. But it's the participation element carries on into the next project, and for me it's a great way to be nosy. I would have liked to have made portraits on the border, but as an Englishman with no connection, I felt it was asking too much from people to trespass on the land, start poking my nose about, asking questions to educate myself, and then to take their picture. So for me, that statement asking them to write about it is my portrait of them.
Okay, thank you very much.
Ruth Salisbury, she's also asked the question, like in response to Brexit and COVID and the time that is now lapsed over that period, have the comments from people written over that period of the project significantly changed? And if they have, how?
So Ruth's my cousin, so thank you very much for coming along, Ruth. To make it personal to my family, my mum has written in it twice without me knowing and changed her opinion as a result. I feel very guilty, and again, she'd kill me if anyone tells her, so don't tell her. But I think because of the people that I mix with on the whole and the places it's been exhibited, there's definitely more of a liberal stance of the people that are contributing. So, which is always that they want to remain, and that there's definitely the majority of people are in the remaining camp. I think as time have gone on, people have become more ardent about that within the comments. One of the things with the project and why I made it was to bring it back to England and to let the public see it, which was, and the whole tearing element that Deirdre was talking about a minute ago was so that it would evoke a response from people that aren't involved in the arts, aren't involved in photography, probably aren't involved in politics, but by making that tear, it creates an emotion. It's an emotive action. So then it gets them to write it down. So it was exhibited in a market hall in Derby, where members of the public would be coming past it. At the International Photography Festival of Hull, it was in a shopping centre in an empty shop where members of the public could come past. So I think that's, for me, that was a really important element. I know I've gone away from your question, Ruth, but I think there has been a change. One thing that I'm hoping to do now, because I've got so many comments and I've started working in academia, is to continue the project as a research practice, and hopefully collaborate with some sociologists or other academics to look into the things that people are writing and how it's changed over the time.
I also think, and it's just worth noting because I know you need to move on to the next one, but also it's a variety of images that you have put in there. So, you know, even we've got, I love the portrait of the sheep, and it is a diversity, and even the presentation of the images that were positioned in different ways. And I think that all adds to the flavour of it, and the diversity of, you know, reflecting the diversity of the people that's actually engaged with it. Because there was a pile of photographs that you had, and people could pick their photographs. So there was a double act nearly, well, triple, because you picked your photograph, you tore it where you felt the border might be, and most people had no idea. And I know I certainly didn't. So you had to use your imagination. And then the third one was to actually the physicality of writing. So I think it was a very interesting project. And you are possibly doing a border in Scotland as well coming up. Yeah.
I'm hoping to do the Scottish border and the Welsh border, because it's it raises such questions about my own identity as an English national. I'm jealous of the Irish, the Scottish and the Welsh because they have a real strong sense of national identity. And as an Englishman, and relating it to the whole Brexit thing, when people start talking about sovereignty, this, that and the other, for me as an Englishman, when I think of being an Englishman, I think of football hooliganism, St George's flag, the far right, and it's been appropriated in the wrong way. Or if we talk about colonialism, the Irish, the Scots and the Welsh just blame it on the English, even though they were just as bad. But I'm not going to go there because I don't know enough about it. So,
fair enough.
I think there's all this that I'm interested in learning more about because I don't have any history in it, but it's something that impacts me as an individual and my thoughts, and has been raised by the work on the Irish border. So I'd like to do the other two borders. And now that Brexit's happened and there are going to be impacts which weren't foreseen or we were told wouldn't happen, I'd also be interested in coming back and revisiting the Irish border after an amount of time.
Yeah, cool. Okay, we're going to let you move on to the next project that you've been working on, the Amazon.
Okay, all right, I'll attempt to share my screen again. If you could just let me know that we're seeing that okay?
Yep, perfect.
Cool.
Yep.
So those that weren't able to visit, this is my show when it was at Belfast Exposed Gallery, and in the vitrine in the middle are 3 of the participation books. And then the following slide from this is showing the participation pages as part of Derby Photo Fringe and Format Festival in Derby Market Hall. So following on from this project, obviously we're all sat at home now rather than being at Belfast Exposed, which is disappointing because I'd like to visit Belfast again, but good because obviously we've got people from a much broader geographical area that can attend. So when even before the first lockdown happened, I had jobs cancelled for my commercial practice, which funds my contemporary practice. And to the point that I realised I'd have to start using my savings, or I needed to do something. My wife was on maternity from a contracted job, so she didn't have a job to go back to. And so I made the decision to apply for a job working nights at Amazon. After 17 years of being a self-employed photographer, never having a real job for more than 3 months, and that was when I was a student, I made that decision. It was, for me, it was a very emotional decision, thinking about how it would impact me. At the time, we didn't know a lot about COVID and the impact, so I felt I was putting myself in danger, which I wasn't that bothered about, but it's more my family, having a 13-month-old at the time and a 5-year-old. So there was all those issues, how I'd be perceived as a photographer giving up going and working at Amazon. I'm not afraid of hard work. I've worked in the post office when I was 18, working long shifts to save up to go abroad and things like that. So it was more just the change and accepting that I couldn't provide and couldn't work as a self-employed photographer. So I took the job at Amazon, and I was fortunate that 2 weeks in, I was contacted by Historic England, who commissioned me to document a week of my lockdown. And I decided I wanted to do it at Amazon because that was the biggest impact of my lockdown. And so I harassed people from Amazon on LinkedIn who were higher up the pay grade than worked in my factory or the distribution warehouse, and persuaded them using Historic England's name that I should be allowed to make work there. So I wanted to continue the social documentary and the participation elements because I felt Amazon has a bad name in the press. People think, oh, you work at Amazon. Oh, I stopped buying from Amazon because of something I read in the press. And I can only, in the same way with the Irish border, I can only base things on my own experience, which is my first-hand experience. And when I went into Amazon, the conditions are great. They expect people to work hard and earn the money, but you work as hard as you want to. For me, that's pretty hard because I get bored easily. So 10 hours in the same place, I need to do something. I can't just pack parcels slowly because the time then goes slowly. And so what I'd heard about Amazon and my perceptions about it were totally conflicted compared to my experience. And when I thought about the people that worked there, that worked really hard, really cared about what they did and how they were getting stuff out to people that were isolating or shielding and couldn't get out, I felt it was really important that they have a voice and say what they felt about the pandemic, whether it be that they thought it was all nonsense and it was a hoax, or whether they'd had their mother die not too long ago from COVID, and you know they still had to come to work. So I was fortunate that Amazon agreed to allow me to make work. It was agreed with my managers that I'd spend the last hour of every shift making portraits, as long as the associates agreed. Initially, they asked to see the pictures that I was producing before I put them out there, and they soon realized that it was a contemporary photography project and they didn't have anything to worry about. So they saw the first maybe 20, and then after that, the bosses didn't know what I was doing. They just let me. I've updated them as and when. So, and all the things that people have written, I asked them to write two things about how they felt personally or had been impacted personally by the lockdown and the pandemic. And I suggested potentially a positive thing and a bad thing, or it was entirely up to them, and it needed to be personal, not about Amazon. I had to really emphasize that it wasn't about their employer, the job. It was really about me being nosy, my project, and trying to create again another record that's different from social media, the main media, and politicians. And I was also surprised that I've never worked somewhere that is so diverse. So the gentleman on the screen now, he was from the Sudan, and he'd been waiting 4 years for his wife to come and join him. And she was supposed to come, but a plane had been cancelled because of COVID. There was a guy from Yemen. There was people from all over the world working at Amazon for different reasons, getting paid quite well. We got a bonus because of COVID. So at one point I was on 27 grand a year pro rata for doing just warehouse work. They trained me up on to use various items, and as long as you showed initiative, they took advantage of that and put you in different jobs. So for me, working along people from all over the world was fantastic, in different situations, and being able to ask them about it and find out about people. This lady here, she was cabin crew, and she lost her job and had been there 3 months. Some people I photographed had been there 4 years, others had been there 2 days. And so it was a complete mix of people. I was also fortunate that Amazon let me, or they asked me to photograph the warehouse to show the restrictions they'd put in place because of COVID for a PR piece. But for me, it just gave me free reign of the whole factory. So it meant I could go where I wanted, do what I wanted, and take pictures how I wanted, which was something that I relished that experience. That being said, after 5 months, I was happy to leave because I am a photographer. I'm self-employed, I'm independent, and working night shifts isn't the best, especially with a small family. So once my wife finished maternity, got a job, and I could be a kept man again and help look after the children, I started making work in contemplation of my time there in the pandemic. And I'd saved all the masks that we were given, and saved other things, all the gloves that I wore, because I knew that I wanted to respond to it in some way. So when you see the photographs of the masks, or there's a performative self-portrait of myself wearing all 64 masks, that's me reflecting, and I suppose showing my insecurities and the things I mentioned at the start about the emotions I was feeling about taking that job at Amazon, and the whole impact of the pandemic on myself and my young family. Caspian, my youngest, is now 18 months. He spent more life in lockdown than he has out. He's not been able to go to the baby groups that his sister would have gone to. He's not been able to see relatives, grandparents. And so obviously that has an impact on him. It also has an impact on me and my wife. We've never had the chance to miss him because he's always there. And as much as I love him, I'd really love the opportunity to spend a week away on the bordering island and miss him. So the reason I talk about my young family is because when I did the self-portrait with the 64 masks, Amira, my daughter, she was inquisitive. She'd already been asking about why I wasn't a photographer, why was I working at Amazon. And so when she asked if she could wear the masks, I thought it'd be some fun, so I did that with her and did it in a safe way, because people always think it's abuse that I put all these masks suffocating my child, but I did it in a way so she had safety spectacles on. I put all the masks on apart from on her eyes and then her mouth, and she was watching on the monitor live as we did it. And the last masks I put on were the ones across her eyes, and then I said, are you ready? I'm going to put one over your mouth, and I did that, and she gave me a thumbs up, and I made that portrait. Then she wanted to do it with the pink mask and then with the green mask, and we were in the studio, my garage, for a good couple of hours doing it. And then my thoughts turned towards Caspian, my youngest, and I did think it'd be a bit cruel to put him through all of that against his will. So I used one of his teddy bears and staged the shot with all the masks on, and then swapped him in to do a composite with the same lighting, so that I could create a composite where it looks like my son's covered in 64 masks and it's obvious as a baby, to get people to think about the way that this pandemic and COVID has affected not just ourselves, but our children and the younger generations. Also, I'm interested in the way that we photograph children these days, because sweetly, my daughter for my birthday asked my mother for lots of pictures from when I was younger and created an album for me. And there was pictures of me naked in the bath, pictures of me naked outside. Just generally, still now, I prefer to be, I'm a hot person. I like to be in my shorts and my sandals. And it made me consider how I photograph my children, because if they don't have all their clothes on, or my daughter's uncovered, then I think twice before taking a picture, which for me feels unnatural. That I have to question whether I should be taking a picture of my own daughter. So using my children and the ethics surrounding that and putting them out there on the internet where they can never get them back is something that I think is important that we think about. And it's something which is also wrapped up in that element of the work, even though it's a totally different idea from lockdown, the pandemic, and working at Amazon. But all of those things impact my family and the decisions I make and ideas that I have when I'm making my work. So I think I better stop there for questions, Deirdre.
Okay, Tristan, thank you so much for that. You make a really valid point. I think even just your last point in the ethics of photography, it's becoming more and more important as we as photographers engage in the representation of the image, and it's more commonly reflected into the female image in the gaze of the male, but also photographers are now being challenged about if they're using their children, and is it a power control and things like that. So and it is a pity that that we have to sort of censor what we do, but in a real world, in the world we live in, I think that's totally relevant. And I love the story of your daughter wanting to change the colors because I think your participatory project and the way you've continued that on is it's been quite smart and clever and really relevant and really interesting for others to share with others, because that's within the pandemic. I suppose one thing that we have been doing is connecting with others, and that's one of the most powerful things. And even when you're talking about a well-being aspect, and we have all suffered as a consequence, we've all went through a level of trauma, but that connection with others is ultimately really, really important as we navigate our way out of it, and through the journey of it, but also navigate our way out of it. So I think the story there that you have to share is really vitally important. And I do think that, when it comes out the other side of the pandemic and galleries therefore open again and festivals, there's a really good case of the presentation of your work in it. I would love to see more of it. Maybe I would be useful, a few questions. One of the things that people, as an artist, just as you as an artist, the sacrifice that you had to make for the first project, people, they see the end project, they go, wow, photographer. You weren't financially supported, with the first project, the Invisible In Between. You weren't supporting, you had to do that all of your own reconnaissance. And to be honest with you, you traveled back and forth to the border counties all on your own costs, and had to leave your pregnant wife at certain times as well, which was a a challenge for you, and I know you found it difficult and hard. But as an artist, and the limited support sometimes that artists gets, what's your opinion on that? Or do you think that's part of your duty just to go with it?
It's a big can of worms.
Sorry, but yeah, throwing it out there.
I think it's horses for courses in a way. For me, because I don't have a contemporary background, I've never understood necessarily the way and means to get grants and work around that. I've tried repeatedly with the Invisible in Between to get funding from the English Arts Council. I even got a mentor to write a bid for me, and was unsuccessful. I have been successful once as part of a collective, so I can't complain. But I think for somebody that's an emerging artist like myself, it is difficult to get funding, and the amount of time it takes to get that funding, the project's finished or your idea's finished. I'm because of my personality type or my ADHD, I find it, if I don't jump on an idea when I've got it, it won't happen. And so I have to do things as quickly as possible so that I can maintain the energy, the passion and the emphasis on them. And when it comes to writing an Arts Council bid, it just overfaces me. And it's much easier for me to go and find a day's work, or even go and work at Amazon and earn the money, than it would be to spend 5 days for an application which someone will read somewhere, know nothing about me, my project, to make decisions. And I suppose, so my way around it at the moment is because although I enjoy working commercially, I want to continue my practice as it is and do the things I'm more passionate about, more interested in. So with me starting working at a university, I want to try and get funding and turn my photography practice into photography research practice. And I'm learning about it. I'm still going to have to fill out funding applications. And as creative people, generally, it's not our forte to fill out forms. And so I think there's definitely a bias against people that, one, don't have a solid career. And when we had all the COVID crisis funding that came out, I looked at it and I'd have to fill out pages to get 500 quid, which, you know, for people, unless you're an established artist that's been living off funding quite nicely, they're already in the system, know how it works, and there's money out there for them. And this is I only can talk from my personal experience, but from, again, an emerging artist, which isn't in that, I suppose, bubble of funding, it just became really difficult. So I'd look at stuff and it'd be 200 quid here, 500 quid here, which is, you know, I'm sure it'd be really helpful to people. But when you've got a family and overheads, because with the government funding or the self-employed payment, they'll pay me 80% of my profits up to a certain amount, but none of that was my actual living. It doesn't pay for the overheads of the business. I cancelled my Adobe today and it cost me 40 quid to cancel my year subscription. So there's all these costs, so I'm going off on a different tangent.
No, I think it is relevant, and there is some artists here who have been successful with funding, and there's some that haven't been. And I do think that it's worth us noting that the sacrifice sometimes an artist has to make, but there is something within you that makes you go for it anyway, and we welcome that. We really do.
I wouldn't be honest, Deirdre, if I didn't say a lot of it is very self-indulgent. Deciding to spend 7 weeks over the space of 3 years, leaving my wife looking after the children so I can do something that I enjoy, it's like going to the football for me, or going fishing. So I want to make my passion my income and my work. So it's you know.
Yeah, but it's even like whenever I asked you, you came over and it was on a Saturday, and I'm not even meant to be in a work on a Saturday, and you were there, and I went, well, what are you doing with this? And you went, oh, you did mention about Derby, and I went, no, but why? What are you doing here? This is going to impact on us, and I didn't have any budget either, and I squeezed a little, not a lot, but I do think it's important that it does have an influence on you. There's a couple of questions here. Could Tristan tell us more about his planned academic collaboration, and perhaps they could insist of the research that you're grant using? That's from Alan. A few other ones. Did Tristan's photos inspire the actual Amazon advert and promoting the company's working conditions? And I know you didn't do that, but perhaps there is something there. And what do you feel the Amazon portraits might influence how your approach to future projects, border projects? So there's three things there. Yeah. Do you want to take one at a time?
The first one was about research. So with regards to that, I started my post in January, so it's very early days, but I've got my first funding forum meeting on tomorrow. So ideally, I've already been in touch with the Garrett Carr. He wrote a piece for me about the project and the introduction to it. So I've already collaborated with Garrett and Conor Callaghan from Sheffield University. What I'm looking to do now, I suppose, is reach out to people that have an interest in the project and the public participation, and try and work out a way about how we can analyse that, the information we have in the pages, and towards making, I suppose, just making people more aware of how the whole event of Brexit, the vote, impacted people and the actual members of the public's thoughts, I suppose. And I'd like to somehow make the project into an archive, or make it somewhere where it can stay for prosperity, and people will be able to look back at it in 20 years, 30 years, 130 years. And so it's how to go about that, because I don't have the experience, I suppose, or the understanding of how to negotiate that.
Yeah.
What was the other question?
Yeah, it was about will your Amazon project influence your future border projects?
Yeah, I know there was something about, did I do an advert for them as well? And I did. They sent somebody in to take a photograph of me whilst I was working for an article, because they wanted to show how great they were employing air hostesses, architects, all these people that had been out of work. And to be honest, they were a lifeline for a lot of people. So I was happy to do that. To be honest, I was happy to do anything to get me to be able to make my personal project and get an insight into their employees. And with regards to it influencing future work, yes, I think as an artist, you grow with time, you grow with every project, you learn more about yourself, you learn more about how to participate with people, especially with the social documentary element. Again, I'm not a natural portrait photographer. It's not something which I relish because of that. I don't mind interacting with people, but because people are uncomfortable having their photograph taken, I don't feel comfortable making them do it. Because even if you ask them politely, often they're saying it because you've put them in that position. And so I struggle with that. So I would like to make portraits of people on the border and going forward, but I suppose I don't want to pigeonhole myself into being a participatory social documentary photographer, because my interests are so varied, but at the same time I really enjoy that as well. So it definitely will impact me going forwards, because every stage of my work, every project I do reinforces my ideas. The research that I do behind it, the conversations we have now, the questions you ask, it inform me, and the things I lie awake at night thinking about. So
because you're talking about portraiture and that, we do have a question from Dominic here going, do you believe that the wearing of the masks, so the people that you were able to take the portraits off on the border, because they were wearing masks, do you think that makes it more the anonymity of that makes it easier for people to do it, to agree to the portrait being taken?
Yeah, because that's what I'd be telling them when I was persuading them to stand for me, was that because a lot of people at Amazon weren't that interested in doing it, because they didn't understand why I'd want to do it. So I had to persuade them that, one, they'd get to stop working for 20 minutes, half an hour, and two, no one would know who they were anyway. And a lot of them were concerned about their haircuts and didn't want to take hats off. But initially my idea was to try and do, a previous project of mine was doing typology of portraits of people wearing their workwear and non-workwear. And so that's also fed into identity and perceptions. So my initial idea was to take people with their masks on and their masks off. But I was told by Amazon that there was no way that I could take pictures of people with their masks off. And to be honest, I ignored them. I did start probably did the first 30 with mask on and mask off. But then I just forgot about it, because it was hard enough. After a 10-hour shift, trying to think of everything, making sure everything spot on, and I had an LED light that I'd have with me, and I shattered. So yeah.
Maybe a final question on this. It's about where the value, I suppose it relates to, and it's going through my head as well, the value of the work that you're doing, and what happens there afterwards, and you know, whether, you know, Belfast Exposed for the work that you've done here in Northern Ireland would be, you know, happy to look at it. There's the Kane archive, there's the Prony archive, but even from the Amazon kind of work, I think institutionally, it's important that you maybe consider, or have you considered the archiving of it for the future? Because whilst we're in the pandemic and we get out to the other side, there's going to be a legacy of that, and actually having valuable information like you've gathered, I think is really vitally important. For example, Belfast Exposed, we use our archive to support in many ways, but an awful lot of it is supporting victims of the Troubles and survivors of the Troubles, and people's been engaged on it. And looking back to those photographs is a really fantastic starting point. So is it something that you think about, or would you think about archiving the work?
I think any artist, as far as I'm aware, would love their work to be in an archive, because it's validation for you as an artist in the work you're making. I'm fortunate that the Historic England Commission, a part of that was to have five photographs submitted to their archive.
Yeah.
And with Historic England, I think they only saw 20 images. Then the project's gone on, and so there's 137 images in total, I think, now. Yeah. And then also I've been fortunate that there's a mass isolation project which a few people have been involved in. I think Format are the people that I'm aware of in Dark Format Festival, and they've been working with the Photography and Archive Centre, Research Centre, the Photography and Archive Research Centre, LCC in London, and they've taken 10 of my images for an exhibition that's going to be, that they're running at Format in the next couple of months. So other than those two interactions with archives, I've got no clue about how archives work, how to get my work in there. For me, I want my work to be archived. I want everybody to be able to see it and benefit from hindsight, because really it's a record of these things that have happened. It's just a case how again, going forward, how to do that. It also, I think, is there a way to monetize that?
Well, Christopher Barr has come up with an idea. He thinks that you should maybe even look at the idea of a photo book, and there's a way to monetize that quite quickly. Yeah, write that down. So we can certainly help you, and we'd be keen to come back to those questions.
Just to respond to the photo book one, I'm very unorganized, but I do have some copies of a small book that was made about the invisible in-between that retail at £12.50, including postage and package. So please email me as and when you'd like one. I know Belfast Exposed sold them for me.
Yeah,
so that was great.
I think we sold out of them, actually, to be honest with you. So we'd be happy to facilitate that.
And one other thing quickly, Deirdre, with the Amazon project, because I was speaking to Dowie Lewis, the publisher, who's also supported me looking at my work and things, and he suggested that I make a collector's box of the Amazon project to coincide with the Format exhibition.
Yeah.
So at some point in the next 2 weeks, there will be, I'll have launched that collector's box, which will contain 30 images in a presentation box. So if people want to follow me and stalk me, they'll hear about it.
Okay, cool. Just one really last question, and it's a more generic one. Just for inspiration, do you want to just tell us quickly what's inspired you to be a photographer?
Yes.
Or what's influenced you? Yeah.
I suppose from an early age, I was aware of photography. My dad's house was plastered with photographs that his brother had given him. I'm lucky that my Uncle Roger and Auntie Jane are here watching. So Roger, a photographer himself, and has always made work and has been really active within photography clubs. So he'd always give my dad his misprints from his darkroom. I don't think he ever got the best ones because they were always in competitions. And so all up my stairs, my dad would have these pictures because he wasn't a fan of decorating. So I grew up with that. And when I'd see my Uncle Roger, I would go in the dark room, and before I went off to, I did a gap year in Africa, Southern Africa, after my A-levels, and he gave me, I think it was 10 rolls of Fuji Provia process paid. So all I needed to do was take pictures and send them off. It was all paid for. So I think that and my love of the outdoors and being able to capture that and share what I'm enthusiastic about has led to me being a poor photographer.
Judith, sorry, and I'm going to cut it after this, but just because she had asked it and I missed it. Judith really mentioned that you're doing like a border project about the Welsh border, and she understands both the Irish and Scottish borders are impacted by Brexit, not least because of their populations voted against Brexit. However, this was not the case in Wales. Now, this is maybe a bit controversial, so let's get it going. But would Brexit figure as much an Welsh border project, do you think?
I think because of it's about discovering my own sense of national identity and my own identity as an Englishman, and also about exploring places that I've never been before or don't have a good understanding about. I'll look at each border as its own border. So at the moment there's talk about the Welsh wanting more independence. I don't know enough about it yet because I've not visited it. So because it's an excuse for me to wander around beautiful countryside and explore the UK and Ireland, I'll try and treat each border, I'll give it the same attention as if they're children and you've got to treat them all the same. So obviously things will change as I go, but I'm trying to be as objective as possible with the project because it's all about me learning and understanding, because I don't have a right to tell the Irish about their border. I don't have any right to tell the Scots about their border, or the Welsh about theirs. So for me, it's about learning for myself, educating myself, and then sharing work so that other people can look at it and form their own opinions and their own thoughts based on that reflection.
Okay, I think we're going to have to leave it at that because we're just over the hour. Unless there's somebody got something really burning they want to put their hands up. No. Well, on that note, I just want to say thank you so much, Tristan. That was a fantastic insight into your practice, and the amount of comments that we have here just saying how much they love the work, and the participatory element of it was really so engaging and thought-provoking. So thank you very much. And to everybody else, if you are genuinely interested in getting one of Tristan's small books or his box set, you can contact us and we'll help facilitate that. Okay, thank you very, very much. Right, bye. Round of applause.